There's one word sitting at the center of Hermetic philosophy. Almost nobody who uses it can say where it came from. The word is logos. You have met it already. It is the word in the opening of the Gospel of John. It is the reason in rational. It is the logic in logic. In Hermetic texts, it does something stranger than any of that. It is not a word that God speaks. It is a thing God is made of, standing between an untouchable source and a world that somehow got built. Here is what almost every retelling gets wrong. This word is not Egyptian, it is not Plato's, and it was not spoken by Hermes. Someone put it there. Someone specific in a specific city, solving a specific problem that had broken the philosophy of his age. And 1500 years later, this same word would be the single piece of evidence that destroyed the entire legend of Egyptian Hermeticism. One word, it built the system and then it convicted it. Start with the language because the confusion starts there. In ordinary Greek, logos is one of the busiest words in the language. It means a word. It also means a speech, an account, a ratio, a reckoning, an argument, a reason. A merchant settling his books was dealing in logos. That ordinary range matters because it tells you the word was not invented for mysticism. It was borrowed into mysticism. It arrived already carrying the sense of something that makes accounts balance. So when a philosopher says the cosmos has a logos, he is not being decorative. He is making a hard claim that the universe is not a heap, that it adds up, that there is a reckoning running through it. And if you want to know why order exists at all instead of noise, that is the oldest question there is. The logos is the answer somebody gave to it. Everything that follows is the story of who gave it and how the answer mutated. Here is the sentence you will find repeated everywhere in books and videos and forum posts. Plato's logos. It is wrong. Plato does not have a logos in that sense at all. In the Timaeus, which is the dialogue where Plato explains how the cosmos got made, he uses the word logos in the ordinary way, a reasoned account, an explanation. It is a tool for talking about the world, not a being inside it. What the Timaeus does have is something else, and this is the piece people are actually reaching for. It has a craftsman, a figure who takes formless material and shapes it by looking at a perfect model. That figure is the Demiurge, which simply means the craftsman or the public worker, and Plato does not identify him with divine mind, he leaves him as a craftsman. So the logos as a living cosmic principle is not in Plato, which raises an obvious problem. If it is not his, whose is it? The trail runs through two places before it reaches anything Hermetic. The first is Heraclitus in the 6th and 5th centuries before the Common Era, who used logos for a principle governing all change. His surviving text is fragmentary and famously difficult, and scholars still argue about how much weight the word carries in him. The second is the Stoics, and here the picture is much clearer. For them, the logos is not a metaphor. It is a real, material, fiery, rational principle running through the whole cosmos and ordering it from the inside. Stoic logos is immanent. It does not stand above the world looking down. It is in the wood and the water and the animal and you, and your reason is a fragment of it. That is a complete and coherent picture. It is also, for anyone who believes God is utterly beyond the world, completely unacceptable. And that collision is where our word gets its real job. Set up the difficulty, because without it none of what follows makes sense. By the 1st century, the dominant reading of Plato had pushed God very far away, not a craftsman with his sleeves rolled up, utterly transcendent, beyond change, beyond matter, beyond description. That sounds impressive. It is also a trap, and the trap is simple. If God is genuinely untouched by matter, God cannot touch matter. A being that cannot be affected cannot reach down, so how did anything get made? How does a world exist at all? And worse, how could a human mind ever reach something defined as beyond reach? You have exactly two ways out. You can let God come down, which costs you the transcendence you just built, or you can put something in between. Every serious thinker of the period took the second road. The question was only what the bridge was made of. The answer comes from a specific person in a specific city, and he is not who people expect. His name is Philo of Alexandria. He lived from roughly 20 before the Common Era to roughly 50 after it. He was a Jewish philosopher writing in Greek in the most intellectually crowded city on earth. Philo had a particular problem, and it was sharper than anyone else's. He held to a God who is genuinely one and genuinely transcendent. He also held to scriptures in which that God speaks, plants a garden, and walks in it. His solution was to take the Greek word already lying around and give it a role nobody had given it before. The logos becomes the intermediary, the agent through which the world is made and the means through which a human mind can apprehend God. Philo calls the logos the firstborn of God. That is his phrase, and it is worth keeping precise. Notice what that move accomplishes. God stays perfectly transcendent, untouched, exactly as the philosophy requires, and the world still gets made, and a human mind still has a route upward. Nothing has to be given up. It is an elegant solution, and elegance travels. Within a century, that seat between source and world is standard equipment across half the schools of the Mediterranean. Here I have to flag something, because it is where this topic gets misquoted constantly. The phrase second God attaches itself to Philo in a great deal of popular writing. It is safer to say that the language of a second God belongs to later Christian writers, Justin Martyr among them, reading Philo and pressing him in a direction he did not go himself. Philo's own preferred language is firstborn, an image, an instrument. That distinction is small, and it matters enormously, because it is the difference between one God with an instrument and two gods in a hierarchy. Whole centuries of argument sit in that gap. What Philo unambiguously did was install the logos in the space between an unreachable source and a made world, and once that seat exists, it does not stay empty. Everyone in the following 2 centuries who needed a bridge found one already built, Hermetic writers included, which brings us to the texts this channel keeps coming back to. There's a name for the intellectual world these texts were written in, and knowing it explains a great deal at once. Historians call it Middle Platonism, roughly the 1st century before the Common Era through the 2nd and 3rd centuries after. Platonism absorbing Stoic and Pythagorean material, obsessed with exactly the problem we just described. This is not a fringe, it is the mainstream. And the striking thing is what else was being written in the same water at the same time: Gnostic texts. The Chaldean oracles, early Christian theology, and the Greek Hermetic writings that would later be collected as the Corpus Hermeticum. They disagree with each other, sometimes violently, but they share a vocabulary and they share a problem. The transcendent source, the mediating principle, the descent into matter, the way back up. So when a Hermetic text reaches for the logos, it is not producing secret Egyptian doctrine. It is doing what everyone in the room was doing in the shared language of the room. Now we can read the actual structure, and it is cleaner than most summaries make it. The first treatise of the Corpus Hermeticum is called Poimandres. In it, Hermes receives a vision from a divine being who identifies himself as the nous, the mind, and the order runs like this. From the source the one comes nous, divine mind, from nous comes logos, and the logos is what orders the cosmos. Read that sequence slowly because it answers the question this video opened with. Mind comes first, the word comes second. The world comes third, which means the Hermetic claim is not that thinking makes things happen. It is that reality has the structure of thought, because thought is what it descended from. Those are different claims, and the second is much stronger. Everything you have heard about the universe being mental is a distant echo of this arrangement, but the version most people have heard is not this one, and the difference is a straight 1900 years. This part is uncomfortable, and it needs saying plainly. If you know Hermetic philosophy through the 7 principles, through mentalism and correspondence and vibration and polarity and rhythm and cause and effect and gender, then you know it through a book called the Kybalion. The Kybalion was published in 1908 under the name of the 3 Initiates, and the authorship is widely attributed to William Walker Atkinson, a leading figure of the New Thought movement. Those 7 principles do not appear as a set in the Corpus Hermeticum. Scholars have pointed out repeatedly that the framework tracks early 20th century New Thought far more closely than it tracks the ancient texts it claims. Now hold both halves of this, because the honest position is not the cynical one. The list is modern. The intuition underneath the first item is not. Mind before world is genuinely ancient. It is in Poimanders. What is modern is turning it into a numbered law with 6 siblings. And there is a reason the modern packaging spread so much further than the original. 7 numbered principles are teachable in an afternoon. A vision of mind speaking to a man in the 2nd century is not. Clarity travels faster than depth. To understand why any of this got confused, you need one Renaissance scene. In 1463, a scholar named Marsilio Ficino translated the Greek Hermetic texts into Latin at the request of Cosimo de' Medici. The first printing followed in Treviso in 1471. There is a detail here that tells you how badly Europe wanted this. Cosimo had Ficino interrupt his work on Plato to do the Hermetic texts first. Plato could wait, this could not. And what Europe believed it was reading was this: a body of wisdom by an Egyptian sage named Hermes Trismegistus, older than Greek philosophy, roughly contemporary with Moses. That belief is what gave the texts their enormous authority for the next century and a half, not their content, their supposed age. If those texts were that old, they were witness to a wisdom older than the philosophers. Everything depended on the date. It is worth sitting with the size of the claim before watching it come apart. If the Hermetic writings really came from an Egyptian sage of Moses' era, then Greek philosophy was downstream of Egypt. Plato was an inheritor, not an originator, and a single ancient wisdom stood behind everything. That idea shaped a great deal of Renaissance thought. It is not a small superstition at the edge of the period. It sits near the center of how educated Europeans understood their own inheritance. And the whole structure rested on one load-bearing assumption that nobody had tested, that the texts were as old as they claimed. Testing it required someone willing to do something unglamorous, not to argue about the doctrine, to read the words themselves and ask when people talk like that. That is a much less appealing job than it sounds. Nobody becomes famous for checking dates, and the people most likely to notice a problem were exactly the people with the most invested in there not being one. In 1614, someone did it anyway. The man is Isaac Casaubon, and his method is the whole point. He did not attack the philosophy. He examined the vocabulary. He read the Greek and asked a flat linguistic question. Is this the language of pharaonic Egypt, or is this the language of the Hellenistic world? The answer was in the words themselves: Demiurge, Ogdoad, Nous, Logos. These are terms of Hellenistic Greek philosophy. They are the working vocabulary of the exact intellectual world we described earlier. Casaubon concluded that the texts belonged to late antiquity, placing them in roughly the 2nd and 3rd centuries of the Common Era. Not Moses' era, not Egypt, the Roman Empire in Greek. By the end of that century, most scholars had accepted it. 150 years of authority came apart on a question of vocabulary. And it is worth noticing how quiet the method is. No revelation, no confrontation, no secret document recovered from a vault. A man read carefully and noticed that the words were wearing the wrong clothes for the century they claimed. And now look at which words did it. This is the thing that makes the whole story fold back on itself. The Logos is the central mediating principle of Hermetic cosmology. It is the hinge the entire system turns on. It is what makes the texts feel deep. And Logos is one of the 4 words Casaubon named as proof that the texts were Greek and late. The word doing the philosophical work is the same word carrying the fingerprint. The system was built out of the evidence that dated it. You could not remove the word to save the legend, because removing it collapses the philosophy the legend was protecting. That is not a coincidence. It is what always happens when a text is placed in the wrong century. The vocabulary belongs to a real time and a real conversation, and it says so. Language does not lie about when it was spoken. Here is where most people take the wrong lesson, and I want to be careful. The obvious reaction is that the Corpus Hermeticum is a forgery and can be discarded. That reaction is understandable, and I think it is a mistake. What Casaubon actually did was replace a fictional origin with a real one. Before the texts were the imagined wisdom of a sage who never lived. After they are genuine documents of a real philosophical world, real people in a real city working on a real problem. How does an untouchable source reach a made world? That question is not less serious for being 2nd century instead of prehistoric, and it hands you something usable. When you meet the logos in a text now, you can place it. You know what the word was doing, who put it in that seat, and what problem it was hired to solve. That is a tool you can carry into any esoteric text you pick up. Ask what problem the vocabulary was built to solve, and who else was using those same words at the same time. It works on Gnostic material, on alchemical material, on the Kybalion itself. It also protects you from the 2 failure modes that ruin this subject. Treating everything as ancient revelation and treating everything as fraud. Most of it is neither. Most of it is people arguing. That is what reading these texts well actually looks like. Not older, therefore truer, placed, therefore intelligible. So here is where we land. The logos is not a magic word, and it is not Egyptian. It is the answer a specific tradition gave to the hardest question in its philosophy, when a transcendent source and a material world had to be connected somehow. Heraclitus and the Stoics made it cosmic. Philo put it in the seat between God and world. The Hermetic writers inherited it and built a hierarchy on it. Mind, then word, then cosmos. And that same word in 1614 is what told a careful reader when these texts were really written. Which leaves one thing open, and it is the thing I keep circling. If mind came first and the word came second, then something was being said before anything existed to hear it. What was being said, and who was it for? If this is the kind of question you want answered carefully rather than quickly, subscribe. That is what this channel is for.